And after that, more one who is okay. So
hello, everyone. My name is Emily, and my thesis is on the vocal behavior of Mediterranean monk seals, and I sort of developed a preliminary automated detection framework as well. I was working with Dr. Lou Rendell and Angela Amlin at the University of St. Andrews and the Scottish Oceans Institute, which is... Sorry. The Scottish Oceans Institute is up there in St. Andrews in Scotland. This is Angela, the lovely Angela. And she got to do all the fun fieldwork stuff, which was here near Formicula, Greece. Sorry.
if you want.
Is that better?
Better.
Okay, perfect. Anyway, so Angela got to do all the fun stuff. She got to go to Greece and record the Mediterranean monk seal. So this is the most endangered pinhead species world. There's less than 1,000 of them that still remain. You can see in the bottom left, there's a map. Everything in gray is where they used to exist. That was a historical range, but now there's only really 3 sections. So ours focused on the Eastern Mediterranean. And some of the main reason for this is because there's a lot of human encroachment. So humans love the Mediterranean beaches, so do these seals, so now unfortunately they have to go haul out in caves. They get entangled a lot, there's pollution, and there's still deliberate killings that happen as well. That all kind of makes them really hard to monitor. So there's so few animals across a really vast range, and they haul it in caves, which is really hard to see. Along with that, we have an extremely limited knowledge of their acoustic behavior. There's only about 4 studies out at all that have anything to do with monk seal acoustics. And one of them is the most recent paper by Angela that came out in March that actually was a confirmation that they actually do make sounds. So they had visual and audio that corroborated so that we knew that they are vocal animals. And she sort of made a vocal repertoire for the first time. And so my thesis kind of slots into her PhD thesis, where the first part is just sort of analyzing this data that she's collected, or parts of it, to look for temporal patterns and vocalization rates. And then the second part was to test and develop some acoustic detectors for specific vocalizations, which then sort of create this multi-step acoustic detection framework. And all of that means that we can start to maybe set up a passive acoustic monitoring program. Passive acoustic monitoring is really, really practical because it allows for the continuous collection of data, no matter the weather or darkness. It has very minimal impact on the target species and the surrounding environment. And then data collection is also possible across really wide ranges and where visual observations. So the Mediterranean monk seal is kind of the ideal candidate for this. So like I said, the study site is in Greece. There were 3 study sites on the island of Formicula and 1 on the island of Tokos. And these sound traps were deployed that you can see with Angela there, which is basically just this recording device that sits in the water for months at a time and just records everything that swims by it. And that gets a lot of data. So there was something like 159,000 audio files. And one audio file is a 15-minute audio bit. So in total, that's about 40,000 hours of video, which would be absolutely impossible for a person to go through by hand, especially in 5 months. And so what we did is we subsampled it. So we took 90 files from each deployment. That amounted to about 270 hours. So that's what I manually audited. That gives us a sort of base truth. So we know when and where there was actually seal vocalization. You can see that across spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and across various years, this is sort of where all those files were pulled. They were pulled to favor daytime. So Angela, she found that seals tend to vocalize during the day. And so that means we kind of wanted to get more of those vocalizations so we could actually have something to analyze. So we picked about 2/3 daytime, 1/3 nighttime. Note the one in red, deployment 5 at site 4, that soundtrack exploded, unfortunately, so we couldn't use any data there. And these are the most common vocalizations. So this is what most of my pieces look like, is working in Brain Pro software and trying to find these vocalizations. And the most common ones are a squirt, which sounds like this. This up here is a vocal bout, so it goes croak, knock, scream, croak, scream, croak, scream, croak. Proportions between Site 3 and Site 4, they're very similar. Site 6 is totally different, but remember there's only one deployment at Site 6, so we don't, that still kind of needs a bit more investigation. And interestingly, no vocalizations were found at all at Site 5. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. We did find some potential new vocalizations, not a lot of examples, but again, we need some more investigation. This is a two-tone call. And some high-pitched hiccups. So Cherry et al. Had also published a vocal repertoire, but these kind of seem like hiccups, they're just much higher frequency, so we think they might be something different. And if you look across the year when there are peaks, there is a really big peak in November and December, which makes sense. That's when they have their pups. And then again in March, which again also makes sense because that's when they wean their pups. But what's interesting is that there's calls year-round, so it's not necessarily linked to reproduction. And we have some dawn peaks, which is quite normal for pinniped species, with pinniped acoustics, and then a massive jump at 1 in the afternoon. So we don't really know if everybody comes out to have lunch or what's happening, but it was similar to findings that Amlin had in her paper as well. So it's kind of just further corroborated. Through all of this was to start to try to create these acoustic detectors in CamGuard. And so Amlin and Barlow had already created a click detector that was targeting knocks and claps, and then I developed a squirt detector and a scream detector. So these are screen grabs from CamGuard. Basically, anytime you see one of these black triangles, it means that the click detector found a click, and when it's red, it means the click classifier thinks that's a Mediterranean voice. And so all these red things, these are two croaks, the darker patches. It means that it found a bunch of things that it thinks is a skill. If you run it on all the data that I did, the 270 hours, there's some 83,000 detections. Only about 3,000 to 4,000 of those were seals, so the precision is really, really low. But it's counting a lot of false positives, and it's doing a lot of overcounting. So what we ended up doing is we made this sort of clustering approach, where only groups of clicks, two of them, and at least 0.9 seconds apart, would be considered a cluster. So this would have done a lot of overcounting. It would have said that there were 10, 20 detections for a single vocalization. This way it's counting as just one vocalization, and it gets rid of a lot of those sort of transient clicks. When you run that again, we get 28,000 detected clusters. 457 of those are actually seals, so our precision is extremely, extremely low. It is doing a good job at catching a lot of the knocks, but it's still doing a lot of overcounting. So we caught 430% of the claps, which is just not possible. But that's probably because the interclick interval in a clap is larger than 0.9. And so it's counting multiple detections for the same vocalization. And so we need to still investigate it further. We don't really know why in a knock sequence like that, it's only catching 2 of the maybe 5. For the squirt detector, the same thing kind of happens. So there's a lot of initial detections, very few positive ones, and the precision is really low. But it's catching a lot of false positives and it's overcounting a lot. So this was an adapted whistle and moan detector and handguard, and so it's trying to catch these sort of contours. And because squirts have these harmonics that kind of go up, what we could do again is a sort of clustering approach where you needed at least 2 of them to be 75% overlapped, and then that would become a detection and everything else got removed. That helped. We only got something like 870 clusters that way. Only 73 of those were seals, so it's only a precision of 8.39%. It's only catching about 3% of the squirts. It's not very ideal, but that's because this detector has a lot of trouble with catching a lot of other things. So there's a lot of overlapping false positives. Some of those other devocalizations, so those are some croaks up there, they have some sort of tonal aspect as well. So it's managing to catch that as well. And sometimes it's not catching all of the harmonics of the squirts. This detector, we didn't have to do any post-processing because, again, you could adapt that whistle and moan detector to sort of only look in a certain frequency band. So we took the average frequencies at which streams occur and then told it to only look from there. And it found 1,600 detections, only 40 of those were actually seals. Precision is again really, really low. But it is doing a good job at actually catching the screens. It is, again, catching those tropes with the tonal bits, but there's a lot of random detections that we need to still figure out how to get rid of. If we look at it at an encounter level, so if an encounter is an audio file that has one seal call in it somehow, then there are only about 73 files out of the 900. And each detector is doing a really good job at sort of catching every single one of them, but it's catching a lot of false positives. And so that's where we started to think about this sort of framework. So we call it the Swiss cheese detection framework, where each slice of cheese is one of these detectors. And if each detector says, yes, there is a seal call in this file, and all 3 of them say it, then that would be considered an actual true positive. And again, it does a really good job at catching almost all of the true positive files. So it catches 70 of 73. It has a recall of 95.9%, but we really can't get that precision higher than 8.9%. But seal detectors are notoriously difficult to make precise. A lot of it has to do with the fact that and they're not a stereotype as cetacean calls. So it's quite easy, not easy, but it's a lot easier to do a cetacean detector than it is a seal detector because these are both squirt calls. And that one, the one on the left, is that perfect, so we can see all the harmonics. This one's a lot more blurry. It would be hard to even detect that visually, and to have a detector detect that would be really difficult. The other thing is that the environment is really difficult. So these sound traps were deployed in less than 5 meters of water. You can see one is that light little bit right here. This is the sound trap, and you've got some seagrass meadows around it. So there's lots of fish. They kind of look very similar to croaks. And the bane of my existence, which are the snapping shrimp. That make these sort of same calls as those clicks. And so it's really confusing for a detector to go through. It's all very touristic, so you've got some boats. This is a boat that went right over the sound trap. You've got snorkelers as well. That took a while to figure out what that sound was. At Site 5, you have a bunch of areas that go through. So this is probably one of the reasons why we didn't find any vocalizations at Site 5. The shrimp are really loud, and then that whole sort of horizontal line of noise, of energy, that's all just the passing ferries that go by. Kind of mimic what some of these calls look like. So this here, these are fish drumming. And then kind of good old noise, which is just waves whacking the sound trap. But if you get absolutely confused. So this is why what we could do is we could remove noisy audio files. So that was taking out the based on the square of the amplitude. And that actually got rid of a lot of the false positives, which means that it would have saved a lot of time going through them. So in fact, if I had gone from some 7 that we now have a greater preliminary acoustic is that definitely the but this novel detection work, that's really the most important. We can process data more quickly, we can deploy sound traps in areas where we think there's implement some more meaningful conservation strategies. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to all the lovely help from my supervisors and everyone at the SOI. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Yeah, it was very nice. It was very good. Yeah, the precision of the methodology is very low.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this is a good data set for training machine learning. Have you thought in the species has been known with the species of seals?
They have, so that's the next chapter of Endless, is actually how to adapt this into machine learning. So that's, unfortunately, I think 5 minutes is really short. This was getting that data set ready and trying to see if we can make some sort of camera detectors. But the next step is machine learning. Because now we have like a really deep
And to match the localizations with biological and behavioral aspects of the animal.
yeah.
Are you, do you have the idea of doing this in the future? Do you think it can be done, or do you need?
I don't think you actually need that much data, but you need visual data so that you can actually see what they're doing in those cases. The closest we can kind of get when these vocalizations, so we can definitely see that there must be something that has to do with like puffing or with leaning, but there's so little information about it that people are still really trying to understand it. But yes, there's some visual data, but I also just ran out of time to try to.
But you have to guess or to do your best guess of one vocalization that you think could be linked to some specific area. Would you do it, or would you risk to say something?
No, I would not. It's something. The one thing that I think is very interesting is how different one it doesn't have words for. So what we think that maybe, this is a big maybe, is that site 6 is a little bit further away, and that maybe it doesn't have like a hollow cave where popping happens. That maybe that's something. We do these vocalizations all the time. Even if you look at the files that have all of that actually have seals in them, they usually do almost every single vocalization. And those vocal bouts, those are really common to have all of those together, to have a knock, a scream, and a croak together.
Yeah.
So,
But not there.
but not there. So I think that would be really interesting to look into further. Also, the no vocalization side 5, but that might just be pieces really difficult to find. So there's a lot of questions that could go into
Yeah,
this.
but also the total frequency, the number of counts is much lower there, no?
Exactly.
That just be that let's see.
No, there's also just one deployment for Site 6, and there's 5 for site 3 and 4 for site 4. So that's why, proportion-wise, it's maybe not very good to look at it that way, but something's definitely, site 6 warrants more investigation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Emily, thanks very much for your presentation. I can imagine you felt pretty frustrated that a lot of times I get all of that data and being like seeing the detection and how it's not being so great. So like when I look at your thesis title, it says the vocal behavior and also trying to do an automated detection. So of course it's very interesting for us to be able to say, okay, they're vocalizing during this period. But like as I understand from the previous answer in the previous question, you're not able to really say that this behavior corresponds to this.
No, I guess vocal activity might have been a better word for that. Just to know that they're vocalizing during these times of day and in these spots at least, so we know that there's seals present. But we don't really know what it's tied to very much. Other than, I mean, the fact that it does rise that much during the pupping period and during the weaning period, I mean, it implies that that has something to do with communication. So it is communicating between seals, but also it's very interesting that it goes through year round. So it's not necessarily tied to reproduction. A lot of seal pinniped vocalizations are tied only to reproductive sort of ecology, but this is different for these guys. They're also different just from the Hawaiian seals. Like they've got a much more diverse repertoire than those guys do. So it's not easy to compare to the Hawaiian seals.
Well, it's very interesting to know anyway that there's this difference. So in terms of so your validation for detection, have you thought of anything else that you could do to like validate your detection through the pen?
To like make the precision better?
Yeah.
Yes, I think the filtering out the noisy files is probably the easiest way just to up. If you actually had taken out all those noisy files and then seen how precise it got, it didn't get better than what the squirt detector managed to do, right? And so I think that if you even just change how much the percentage of overlap needed for the squirt detector, or how many of them needed, or if you honestly, the screen detector is maybe not the best idea just because there's so many transient little bits that you can't cluster that into like a vocal bout, that might be a detector to just get rid of, that it's not doing as much good. The other thing is that these vocal bouts are really, they're really common. And so I think the next step would really just be to look at, okay, each detector is picking something up within, let's say, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. Then that is probably a seal encounter, like a seal vocal bout, and so that should be considered a true detection. It means we're going to lose a lot of those sort of true positives, but at least that way we can know for sure that there probably is a seal, and that won't get rid of a lot more false positives. Because that's really the thing that's annoying, is that that's almost the goal, is to get rid of more false positives than it is to keep true positives, just because there's so much data and we want to get rid of, we don't want to spend that much time going. So I think that would be the next step.
Machine learning would probably
Yeah, very much.
and then lastly, have you thought of anything like to compound your findings, like such as DNA and something like that?
I think
could actually confirm the presence.
Like eDNA would be very interesting, but I think just if we know some of those hollow caves, and if you actually have like a GoPro there, you can see them visually. You can see if there's just even 2 of these seals. Like sometimes there would be overlapping bouts, but you can't for sure say that that is 2 seals. Sometimes you hear them splashing. They wouldn't say something. And I was like, I'm pretty sure you're there, but I don't know for sure. So I think just even having something that could visually say, yes, that is a seal, because the water would be clear enough. That would be really helpful. But I think visual documentation would be the next step. Thank you.
Just some curiosity. Now coming back to the Instagram that you show with the different kind of you collect data in a period when you remind me.
Oh yeah, it's right there.
don't remember the.
It's from 2020 to 2024. And so the main, sorry, I don't know why it's not going back. The main coverage that we have for Site 3 and 4 is 2022 and 2023, and that's across winter, spring, and summer.
So in the graph probably can be useful to add this temporal also.
True.
Whoever. Yes. But in the also other literature available already on something done with is the first other study that can support the.
Yeah, so there's 4 studies, and 3 of them are on the same population. And so there's 2 vocal repertoires now, so Angela just published the one, and then Sherry had done the earlier one.
And other experience similar for other seals in other places, also in the Atlantic or in Hawaii, are there?
Yeah, so they've tried to basically do what I did with the detectors in Camguard for grey seals in Ireland, off the Blasket Islands. But again, they also had really, really tough times with precision, trying to make that really as good as it is. I think almost, if we could just put the sound traps a little bit deeper, that would help a lot. But
Because there are studies, for example, that put a camera on the seal, just following the hunting strategy, the habitat where the seal can, and so merge, the visualization of the activity with the recording of the sound, probably can be better.
it would be amazing if we could do that. I think that the logistics and the paperwork to do that would be absolutely really, really difficult, just because they're so endangered. You can't do a lot with them at all. Even the sound trap, just putting it near where they are was already a really difficult thing to do for Angela. So I would imagine I would love to. I'd love to just observe them and be like, how are you making that trill sound? I don't know. So no, I would love that.
No, just because I know that there are studies done in this way, and so this is something that can really help to interpret, that is the sound, otherwise without this kind of grouping,
Definitely.
Anyway, very
Thank you.
So there is some kind of question to do.
One question, since I never worked with audio files, do you look at the thing, do you listen to it, or do you both at the same time?
So it's quite funny. For a really long time, probably the first week or so, I've been reporting back to Angela. I was like, wow, I have seals in every single one that I go through. And eventually she was like, that doesn't sound right. And I showed her, and I had been listening to fish and thinking they were seals. So it took probably a good 3-4 weeks before I was kind of attuned to what this is. And so at first you're listening and you're looking for anything, like this kind of looks normal. And then sometimes you'll just get these random bursts of energy. These are a little bit more easier to see. And so you're just looking for bursts of energy, and then you're listening to it and confirming that that's actually a seal.
So you're doing it simultaneously.
Yeah, if you were to listen to it, would have taken like 270 hours if I had listened to it in real time. So I usually just click through very slowly to see something interesting pop up, and then I listen to it. And then I make a guess if that was a seal or not, and then I go to Angela and say, what is this? And she'll go, those are snorkelers. And that's usually how it goes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. This is really interesting. I'm wondering, you mentioned that field observations would be really helpful. Do you think that deploying this technology while having a scuba diver or freediver or even ROV down there would be possible, or would it add too much noise interference?
I think I wouldn't put a person down there, just because they do come really close to the sound trap, and you're just kind of interfering with that area. Even the tourism is already enough. I think something oddly like an RV would be cool, even if you just put a GoPro next to it and see what kind of passes by, would be very, very interesting. Or to just do a study that focuses really on the caves, like the hollow caves, and to have so there is some like GoPro footage of that already. Sherry used it, Angela used it for another chapter as well. But it's hard. It's hard because they're so endangered, so you really can't do a lot around them at all. But yes, I think to put something next to the soundtrack that could record what's going on around it would be really, really helpful.
So we are listening now to the second presenters. Go with you.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Maria Fernanda, and I'll present you my thesis titled Risk of Coastal Acidification in Galicia as Fisheries, and to provide a bit of context on how climate change is affecting small-scale fisheries. With increasing greenhouse gas emissions, there has been an intensification of multiple climate hazards, and which has generated a cascade of ecological and social risks. With the decrease of primary productivity and habitat and species loss and shift, we've been losing highly valuable species, which has led to the decreasing profitability of the small-scale fisheries sector. And this poor health of the ecosystem has been threatening livelihoods and food security around the globe. So egg fisheries is a type of small-scale fisheries and is characterized by being spatially structured and target sedentary organisms. And this means that this puts them automatically in a highly sensitive position to environmental stressors due to the inability of the target species of moving. So whenever an environmental stressor arises, these species don't have the ability to move to better areas like other species like finfish or migratory species. And in general, vulnerabilities differ among and within regions due to a number of factors, such as socioeconomic development, research sustainability practices, inequity, and marginalization issues. So this is particularly important because small-scale fisheries support the livelihood of millions across the globe, and of which 40% are women, and especially in small-scale fisheries, shell fishing, women play a crucial role in the development of these activities in many places. So this activity is not only economically important, but it has a high cultural significance, and all the practices that people are taking place is linked to local ecological knowledge that has been passed through generations. So this allows me to introduce my case study, which is shell fishing in Galicia, which is in the northwest of Spain, specifically in the Rías Baixas, which are estuarine systems, and I focus specifically in the northernmost ria, which is Muros and Noia, and the southernmost ria, which is the Ria of Vigo. And as many coastal and estuarine systems, they are currently facing a number of local pressures due to anthropogenic activities, and also on top of natural environmental variability that characterizes estuarine systems. And this also makes them complex carbon systems to the influx of multiple sources of carbon, and which increases the vulnerability of the species that inhabit these areas. So the management of shell fishing in Galicia takes place under territorial use rights for fishing, and this is managed at a regional government level, and they are organized in cofradías, which are fisher guilds that are entities that represent the rights of fishers. And there are two main harvesting modalities that take place in this area, which is on-foot shell fishing, which is female-dominated and is taking place. It's carried out with rudimentary tools and is tide-dependent. So you don't need boats to reach the areas to harvest shellfish. And on-boat shell fishing, which as the name implies, you need boats in order to carry out and reach the areas of shellfish. And they can use multiple methods of to harvest the shellfish, from simple tools to more complex methods such as diving. In general, the sector is currently facing a really critical crisis due to environmental stressors. And recently, this has been reflected highly in the livelihood of people in the area, especially of the women, because as you saw, they are dominating part of the sector. So this leads me to introduce my research objectives, which is to understand the risks associated with coastal acidification in a local case study, specifically quantifying the impact of coastal acidification to shellfish in a spatially explicit manner, and identifying the fishing groups that are exposed the most to coastal acidification and their associated vulnerabilities according to their harvesting modality, and to determine which factors contribute the most to the risk levels of fishing groups and the competitiveness. So the approach that I used to achieve this was based on the IPCC's approach framework to estimate risk, which was through the analysis of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, using multiple data sources to ultimately do a comparison between fishing groups and across cofradías, and to understand the contribution of the risk components in these groups. So first, hazard in this study is defined as the potential of occurrence of climate-related factors that induce adverse impacts on shellfishers. So by utilizing in situ data and its high correlation with salinity, I used model salinity data in the region as a proxy for aragonite saturation state, as this is a mineral that is crucial for the development and growth of calcareous organisms. So using thresholds from literature of aragonite saturation state and its corresponding salinity values, I categorize hazard in 5 levels from very low to very high. And exposure means that when a shellfisher has low catch diversity and high dependence on a few resources, they are more likely to be adversely affected by environmental and socioeconomic impacts. So the indicator that I used for this component was exploitable species diversity per shellfish bank, and categorized it in the same manner. So each cofradia has designated areas for shellfish harvesting, which I refer to as shellfish banks. And each shellfish bank has this information associated with exploitation plans, which has a number of guidelines for exploitation, and specifies which are the target species that are allowed to be harvested by the shellfishers. So by taking a composite index of the average indicate low diversity of exploitable species, and therefore indicating high exposure. The ability to effectively address the hazard via adaptation or coping strategies, and it's calculated by the difference between sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So high sensitivity and low adaptive capacity leads to high vulnerability. And same, I categorize this in the same way as the other components. And for the adaptive capacity, I use Senior and Barnes framework, which define adaptive capacity in 6 main domains. I use this as a baseline to design a survey, and I implemented this in 10 cofradías, where I went and targeted the technical assistants in the cofradías, which are key stakeholders in the sector, as they are the bridge of communication between shellfishers and the fisheries managers. So I conducted in-depth interviews in each cofradía through a structured interview. And I processed all this data and selected and extracted all the variables that I used to calculate each domain of adaptive capacity. And for the socioeconomic, for the social sensitivity component, I used to understand the economic dependence of each cofradía. I analyzed data from shellfish economic contribution from the regional government from 2021 to 2024, and to understand how has been the stability of employment of the sector in these 2 groups. I included in my survey a question to understand how much has each fishing group decreased over a span of 10 years. So each domain was assigned a score, and then from those scores I calculated the final score of adaptive capacity and sensitivity. And risk was overall calculated as the mean of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So here we have hazard, and we have these 2 maps where we're going to focus on. And we see a spatial gradient, specifically here in the Muros and Noya area, that we see an increasing hazard as you go to the inner part of the RIA, which are the brighter colors. And also in Vigo, that is a little bit harder to see, but it presents the same spatial trend. And this is mainly due to the riverine inflow. As I told you in the introduction, these are estuarine systems, so they're highly influenced by freshwater input. So Muros and Noya has a river that has higher flow than in the Rio that flows in Vigo, so that's why you can see a little bit more of a hazard in Muros and Noya. And this source of fresh water is important for productivity as it's an important source of limiting nutrients for organisms, but with recent extreme rainfall events, there have been massive viable mortalities, particularly in 2023, there were 2 massive mortality events that generated abrupt salinity drops and that are related to reduced organized saturation states. So for exposure, we see a similar trend for the Muros and Noya Ria with increasing exposure towards the end, towards the inner part of the Ria. And with Vigo, we see a bit of a more widespread spatial gradient with a high exposure at all parts of the Ria, but if you see that it follows a pattern of higher exposure with the banks that are closer to the coastline. So in general, on-foot shellfish banks are more exposed, so they are in general, they have less diversity in their of harvestable species when compared to those banks accessible by boat. So this indicates spatial limitations and lower catch portfolios for the on-foot shellfish group. And while on boat also has highly exposed shellfish banks, they have availability of very low exposed banks. And there's something important to mention in shellfishing in Galicia, which is the licensing or permits that they need for carrying out these activities. So on boat shellfishing, as I said, that it's done by boat, and the permits are associated with the boat and not the people. So usually boats have more than one type of permit, which allows them to target other species outside of shellfish. So they can go harvest finfish or octopus or other things if they have the permits. So they do this simple year rotation depending on resource availability, which gives them more opportunities to target less impacted zones. And for the vulnerability component, overall we found higher vulnerability for on-foot shellfishers due to their high economic dependence and decline of active shellfishers in the sector. And this is mainly because of the low profitability of the sector due to the bank closures, because when the conditions are bad, they have to temporarily close these shellfish banks to allow the population to recover. And in general, if the conditions are bad, the species that they are able to find are usually not of big size, so in the end, they can't sell them for very much price, whereas on-boat shellfishers have the ability to target areas with better conditions and usually have bivalves of better size and quality, and they can sell them for higher prices. However, there were some groups on the on-foot shellfishing that exhibited higher adaptive capacity than on-boat shellfishers, mainly because they are generally more willing to take action and are usually more aware of climate change impacts. And this is mainly because they are the ones that are already experiencing climate change impacts directly, especially with the recent mass mortalities that mainly affected the shellfish banks in the on-foot shellfishing areas. And in general, on-boat shellfishers just presented lower vulnerability, but there were some groups with lower adaptive capacity, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later. So to sum everything up here, I have 2 radar plots. On the left, on-foot shellfishers, they exhibited significantly higher risks than on-boat shellfishers. You can see the red, the color red of the plot is the risk. And for on-foot, this higher risk is mainly driven due to high levels of hazard and exposure. And this is because their shellfish banks are concentrated in the inner part of the RIA, and as we saw, these are the areas that present the most hazard and exposure. And they also have limited diversification in their catch portfolios. And here, in general, we see a gender risk dimension. looking at the on-food shellfishers that are constrained in highly impacted zones, and they have less ability to switch strategies. And in this case, the spatial rights system plays a dual role because it restricts spatial flexibility. Some important insights that I got from the field, even though cofradías are in the same geographical region and in many cases in the same area, they present very different dynamics. So in order to achieve adaptive management, this should be taken into account. And the generational shift that the sector is currently facing due to the decreasing profitability is also leading to a leadership shift approach due to the changing attitudes from younger generations. And general climate risk perceptions are tied to direct experience due to the mass mortalities. And in general, they are aware of the climate change threats. And just to close here, I conducted a fine scale risk assessment of coastal acidification, where I identified that on-food shellfish were identified the most at-risk group, and because of the location of their shellfish banks and their low species diversification, among other factors. And there is some type of localized resilience here because some of them had more adaptive capacity than on-boat groups. And in general, the fact that some on-boat groups have limited adaptive capacity suggests that they could be increasingly vulnerable with worsening conditions that are likely to happen. And the gender risk imbalance that we observe here highlights the need for targeted adaptation strategies that promote equitable management practices. So thanks for listening, and I'd like to thank all the people involved in this project, which is definitely require a lot of effort, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for questions. Who wants to start?
Okay, Aria, very well done. Very good presentation. I enjoyed the way you frame your work. Although I think there was a little bit too much text in some slides.
Yeah.
I benefited from more figures and maps. It's fine. It's true that probably you talk a little bit too fast in the presentation. Regarding the content, can you explain a little bit more this relationship between the
Yeah.
based on this?
Usually what is used with to understand how terrorist organisms are getting stressed with acidification, because they need aragonite to be directly. But in this, there's this ongoing project called ACID that is studying the they collected institute data of multiple acidification-related variables, including aragonite saturation state. And there is a model of a hydrodynamic model of salinity and temperature already developed for the RIAs, and which allowed me to develop the spatially explicit analysis because of the high resolution that this model allows me to have to understand what are the patterns of salinity in the RIAs. So in general, lower salinity is associated with or also lower aragonite saturation state because it also suggests a change in the carbonate system, which in this case for organisms it can be stressful, and as we've seen with the mass mortalities whenever there are extreme rainfall events that lead to drops, like extreme drops in salinity. Sometimes they said that when they went to the field and collected data, they had values of 0 and they thought it was like mistake in the equipment, but it was just fresh water basically because the river flow was so extreme during those events. So yeah, to try to understand just how acidification can be playing a role, especially for such vulnerable species like calcareous organisms.
Yes, but the point is that they die not because of any change in acidification, they die because of smoke shock, right?
Yeah, well, in this case, yes, but it's not just salinity that is changing in the system, it's multiple factors associated with acidification. So acidification is not really just a process like, for instance, when you talk about rising water temperature, the variable that you're going to use is going to be temperature because that's how you know there's been an increase in temperature. But with the acidification, it's a bit more complex because of the carbonate system that is there. It's not just one variable. So that's why it's also climate. It's sometimes not really included in this assessment because it's challenging to measure it directly. But in this case, with the data availability that I had of the hydrodynamic models and the correlation that I found with salinity and aragonite saturation state, well, this is I used it as a proxy basically for my analysis.
Why do you think you have these extreme low salinity events? Why is that?
Why? Well, because of the freshwater input that come from the main rivers. Like it's not, yeah, it could be because of directly of the rainfall, but also because of the river flow is just increases a lot. And now, actually, there are other factors also there. And in this area, there are dams for power generation. And actually, this is a really big issue, especially in the area of Muros Noya, because especially with these extreme rainfall events, they open the dams as deplete without really checking what implications this might have. So actually, when I went to those cofradías and talked to the people, they told me that they were mostly worried about the management of opening and closing the dam because they're not really looking at it than climate change directly. They were like, because they were seeing this massive mortality is more linked to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maria, thanks very much for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. I thought it was excellent that you made everything very systematic and standardized, and that's how we can actually compare our data. So I thought it was very, very good. I was just wondering when you said that the population that were doing this harvesting on foot, some certain groups could have a higher adaptability. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. Maybe here I'm going to show the indicators that I use for the adaptive capacity part of the vulnerability. So in this case, we see adaptive capacity between access, flexibility, learning, social cognitive agency, and social organization. So the domains that were more prevalent with these groups that exhibited more adaptive capacity with the on-foot group were agency and social organization. So they in general are a more cooperative group, and they, in order to carry out these activities, it's kind of like in an agriculture system that they need to go to the field and prepare the substrate and like conduct seedings, and they do a lot of work in the field that is not just harvesting, like not just like taking the shellfish. So in general, when they are more cooperative, and even whenever they are told to reduce quotas and other things, they are less how do I say this? Less defensive, and in general are since it's on shellfish harvesting and particularly on food, which is dominated by women, they have like really close ties, and they cooperate between each other and also between cofradías. So they're not competing with each other, it seems. They're more willing to cooperate, and yeah, which is very important for adaptation, because even though they are facing a really difficult crisis, they are having this attitude of like, they know that they need to do something about it, because it's not just, I'm gonna stop doing it for them, the cultural part of this activity represents really high value, and you can see sometimes it's super inspiring to see really these old women mainly to keep still they're doing something for decades, and they want to see improvement and want to leave their younger generations their resources in a good state. So yeah, that's what I really feel like I could see with the on-foot shellfishers adaptability despite the crisis.
And with relation to your stakeholder engagement, so we've had questionnaires and obviously interviewed them and all of that.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that relationship went, and have you also reported the results back to them?
Yeah, well, that was one of my favorite parts of this study was to reach out and to go to these places and talking to the technical assistants of the because they have generally a background in biology or in research management, and they really are very close to the shellfishers, so they understand what goes on, and they know like if some people could be a little bit stubborn, they know how to like approach them and everything. So it was really nice to have that collaboration, and most of them were very interested in listening to what I got from this. Actually, I got a few people asking me if we got results already, and actually, since this is an ongoing project, there's going to be more fieldwork campaigns, and also dissemination of results of this part of the study. So we're going to go back to the cofradías and share the results, not just to the technical assistants, but to the sector, because they also have expressed concerns of a lot of people have been studying fisheries resources in Galicia, but they usually take the information and don't really then tell them what this means. And they publish the data, and then there people generally don't, if they don't speak English, they also don't speak Spanish, and they speak Galician. So if there's this language barrier that people need to go back and tell them if they are very worried with their own, but what we're doing in general. So yeah, it's
just some general consideration from my side. I think this is and in terms of take other disciplinary, it's evident that it's not just a matter of managing fish.
yeah.
It's a matter of changing something. And do you think the experts already there, already working in the sector, have some strategy to face the situation, or it's just we have to study, we need more data, but you cannot cover the resources? Idea, some strategy?
Specifically to tackle like coastal acidification, right? Well, in general, I feel like this answer probably differs a little bit if I talk about on-boat shellfishers and on-boat shellfishers, because, for instance, since on-boat shellfishers can have the ability to target other resources that might not be like undergoing mass mortalities right now, the case some cofradías are trying to push. So they're developing exploitation plans for algae harvesting, and which is in some of the, which is also under the shellfishing sector, like algae and other organisms that are not just bivalves. But this also, I feel like it requires a lot of transformation, because since this is such a, this is local ecological knowledge and transfers through generations, they know, and they're experts at doing that. But I feel like they have to undergo a transformation of to know what other strategies could be potentially more adaptable to considering the conditions of the environment, because the extreme rainfalls are going to keep happening.
Do you think they have a perception of an impact of their activity on the ecosystem function or not? It's just tradition.
Actually,
I don't think we have the possibility to maintain tradition in the next year.
yeah. Well, actually, some of them told me that they relate that their activities increase productivity because they go to the areas and they.
But you are a biologist.
Yeah. But
that is not true.
exactly. But their perception is that, and they relate that their influence on the environment is making the system more productive, at least in the shellfish plants.
Okay. So I can imagine their position.
Yeah.
But our role as scientists, we enter in this problem, and I think we have to study also to offer
Yeah.
solutions. Just for curiosity, in your opinion, do you think we have the possibility to suggest something to them, or just this is happening, you have just to change, try to make money with algae because the shellfish are not available, or I think probably other approaches to think about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that as scientists
You have 1 minute for very complex questions.
yeah. Right. Okay. So
So I
yeah.
just to speed up.
Yeah.
Just to speed up. Do you think if it is possible to decide to protect some spot areas and places, to remove completely the impact of fishing and expect that something positive happen in surrounding areas? So the strategy of protected area, for example, is something that can be applied in at least places where there is the
That's a big question, and I think that in the case of, I think that saying that closing areas, which is something that is happening already to reduce the pressure of shellfishing, is a strategy that has been effective to let the populations recover. The thing is that you can't just tell them to stop their activities just like that, because that's their livelihood. So I think that since here in the region you can see also a lot of aquaculture development with the bateas, for instance, if it would be possible to provide alternatives with maybe not doing like on-site maritime like aquaculture, like maybe doing something inland, but still giving the option to continue to be in the sector would be probably something feasible. But telling them to stop doing something, I think to me it's not really something that is very realistic with the sector.
Thank you very much. I would say that not 10 PhDs will not solve the question of flowers.
But
Even 10 PhDs we are in place, so we take the profile on the right. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, good afternoon everyone. My name is Lokesh Pawar and I'm basically going to talk about my thesis work, which was mapping socioeconomic benefits of offshore wind farm and fisheries in French Namur region, which is northwest Atlantic, using Sabato. I will come in the next slide. Okay, so what socioeconomic benefit analysis tool is? It's a decision supporting tool developed in one of the EU project called Bonus Bird Space Project, and the main purpose of this tool is to assess and address integration challenges among stakeholders and among sectors for marine spatial planning, particularly particularly focusing on socio-economic aspect, and it uses 6-step process, which I will come in the next slide. But it goes beyond cost benefit analysis, which is most prominent in economic studies of the sectors. It identifies who benefits and where are the benefits going for the sector. it highlights the trade-off among sectors and among stakeholders and various people involved. So the aim of the research is basically critically apply and adapt. Adapt means I did some modifications in the tool to make it more live rather than static, which was done in the previous methodology. Compare and interpret the spatial distribution of benefits generated by offshore farm and fisheries. This was the region which I chose because it is a region of conflict, especially in France, because it does have good wind density for the offshore wind farms, and it is a high value area for fisheries. Most of the time, and why this study is important is basically most of the time we consider environmental and ecological data to plan, like in marine spatial planning, but most often socioeconomic data are being ignored. So this tool does address those things, and I think it's good to highlight the asymmetries and what are the gaps in policy itself, especially in France. So the methodology which I followed was mixed method, basically combine and reading all the policy document. Of course, it was in French, I translated. And then the data which are publicly available, declaration by the offshore wind farms about their the declaration which they declared publicly for in public participation and all, and then the quantitative data about the industry report and so on. The key innovation is basically this is the first study after this tool was being developed, and it is comparing two sectors. So why it is good is basically most of the time to even assess the environmental impact assessment, we keep one sector and then assess it, but things are more complex and interrelated. And then it is mapping national to regional level. It's I didn't go up to digit postcode, but yeah. And it follows the first sector analysis by, of course, all the literature and everything. Then brainstorming, analyzing value chain, which is highly complex in terms of offshore wind farms. I mean, it is really highly complex. Like fisheries, it's easy to track things comparatively, but wind farms are on another level. Data collection, which was multi-source, database structuring using some of the tools and mapping. This was the pattern which I followed, just collection of data, data clearing, then separating the data and integrating it. The outcomes were quite, I mean, it's, okay, so the tool itself is for the policymakers to make them understand that, just by showing these simple things, so it's not going to be too complicated. So it's clearly visible that what are the high area of intensity where fish, for example, fishermen are being employed in which region. And of course, there has been decline in employment trends, which is having social implication in the society, and then comes the economical aspect. As I said, that Brittany is high level of regional fisheries importance. So, and then this map is also one of my favorites because you can clearly see if we don't have this shows that if we don't have fishery subsidy, the fishery sector is going to collapse the next day. It is just surviving based on subsidies, though in gross value it seems that it is having generating 900 million euros every year, but in reality that's not the case. And then this is the progress of offshore wind farms in French region, all the and their energy targets. Of course, they promote it as being environmentally sustainable. But let's see about economics. And these are all the details of planned and allocated wind farm in France. Okay, so these are, I specifically choose 3 wind farms, Saint-Brieuc, which is, and these are the distribution firms involved and their distribution pattern in the value chain, which are higher up in value chain. For example, operators, suppliers, big suppliers. And what is important here is, I mean, as I said, that the value chain is not easy to track down and where the benefits are going. So, of course, it's spatially distributed and all the high it's a capital intensive industry, so all the stakeholders are, I mean, spatially distributed, though France government do have this mandate to generate, to bring economic benefits to the local area, but still, I mean, you can see that it's not the case. Same in Saint Nazare, it's like it's spread all over the places, and then the other wind farm unit, which is also, and I will come on the live map after this. And this is one of the good practices which they the other wind farm shared, that they gave subcontracts to the local vendors to bring the economic value and develop the local sector. And these are the small companies, local companies. The big wind farms gave them subcontracts, and they declared recently in 2025. But this is the only wind farm in whole France which declared at least. So it is one of the good practices. Though government says that, oh no, we should bring all the benefits to the country. But I mean, and also, I mean, what it doesn't show is the value of the, like how much value is bringing into the local area. It just says number, but I can just give like €100 contract to a company and say that I gave subcontracts. So these are the gaps actually in policy. They prioritize economic sustainability, but that's not the case. And yeah, I think this is the live map. Maybe I will come to this at last so that it doesn't go the whole PowerPoint. But I just categorize the value chain into 11 components to based on the what are the local firms involved in which region. I will come to the map which is going to be interesting. And these are the employment trends which are being generated by offshore wind industry specifically, and there is clear trend. So of course they have upper hand in MSP planning, because they can clearly say the government that, oh, we are bringing economic prosperity, though fisheries is declining, and then based on these sets they negotiate that, oh, anyways fisheries is declining, so you know, at least we are bringing something to the local economy. But as a mediator or as a researcher, what should be our say? That's so the whole thesis was around this, like what do we think about it? And then these are the results. Just like there has been decline in fishermen employed, drop in active vessels, which was less than 12 meter, and as I said, that without subsidies it's not gonna sustain the fisheries. So where should these people go? I mean, in general, that's a critical question. And then, of course, offshore wind farms, it's growing, it's booming, and they are saying that we are economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and but what about social construct of these things? Because they are not declaring anything, and it's very hard to track. Yeah, this is also just like the operator declared that we are going 50%, for example, revenue to coastal community, but there is no other than this. There is I read all the public participation documents, but there is no declaration about where are this 50% going and who are getting the benefits. So maybe like declaring these these things publicly could be a good practice. For the discussion, offshore wind farm and fisheries, there is like the benefits of fisheries are localized, of course. Benefits of offshore wind farms are spreaded and diffused all over the places, especially in terms of economic. And MSP is not neutral. That's what I got to know. That it works in favor of economics many times, because. But the other thing is, for example, in terms of there has been one good case as well, that instead of 11 wind farms due to public participation and fishermen saying that we don't want this wind farm here, they shifted it to some bit farther from the coastline. Instead of 11 rows, they created 8 rows so that fishermen could get more area to fish. And then also about spatial justice in this thing, there has been 38 sessions in public participation, but it is not clear that how input of fishermen are being considered in policy. I mean, we can take meetings and say that we invited all the fishermen and they gave us the output, but explicitly all the documents are not saying that up to which level their things are being considered. And yeah, this tool could be a good version to visualize, even update. And yeah, just the recommendation for like maybe policy makers to integrate socioeconomic data, also have a socioeconomic database. And this tool, which I'm going to show on the live map, is one of the steps contributing to it. And just not treating fisheries as a legacy sector. And also, rather than just focusing on conducting 50 meetings, I think focusing on quality could be a good option. And yeah, these are the conclusion. And the contribution of this thesis is basically, this is the first study case of comparing two sectors at multi-scalar level, and empirically, the tool which I developed, which the map is one of the very good.
Of the wind farm, the wind farm is going to be here.
Yes.
You will see that in the presentation.
Yeah.
I missed that at all.
Yes.
You said you put a map there saying the benefits are spread all over the river, but where is going to be the
that was just a visualization to show that this is the status, current status, and that map was just to show that what is the status of wind farms in the fisheries, and it's possible to create another one. But my main focus was to Brittany, Normandy, there are these are all the local firms which are involved in these regions. And basically, you see, for example, so and the best get the details of each wind farms. Once you click on it, you get all the details of it. So that was mark that.
Another question about this. So you see across a wide range of income of people, from the workers to the bosses of this company. So how that's could you work that out?
Yeah. I tried to get the numbers actually, because that signifies things rather than just the employment number. But offshore wind farm is a sector where they, if the prices are high, they outsource. For example, they buy wind turbines from Spain if the price is high, or if for example, they are not declaring, and it is also temporary. For example, in the value chain, if you are just in construction phase, they will import the workers from maybe Belgium if they have technologically advanced worker who have this skill. And it's not, they are not going to hire local people because they don't know the technology. So yeah, that's the thing. Also, they are not declaring numbers. That's in any case. I mean. Not doing it. I mean, these are all, even they are not declaring firms. You know, in France they have this mandate that you should give subcontracts to the local small firms so that they could develop and export the and bring revenue to the but they are not declaring that. Yeah. And it's very broad.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your presentation. You mentioned in the beginning that you modified the tool a little bit.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Okay. So, for example, as I said that these are the distribution and that these are the big firms. For example, some from UK, some from this thing. So this map is dynamic. As I said that if I update the information, for example, of the employment as well, then this information is gonna change. So and the tool, it uses a regrograph mapping system, which is just static. Once it is published, I mean, you cannot update map, right? We just have a reference baseline. But in a public participation, for example, next year I want to show in a public meeting that, oh, from 10% it has now grown to 13%. So I don't have to redo the work again. It's just, I have to update my drive, my Excel sheet, and like after filtering the data, and it's gonna be updated. That's the best part. So this is online basically. It's publicly available. I mean, the link is there in my thesis as well. So.
And how, like, what does the future look like? I mean, how can you use your results?
Okay. So in my conclusion, as I said that they are not declaring, for example, anything. Offshore wind farms. They are saying that we have given 50% compensation to the local local municipality. But if so, these are the gaps in the policy which French government do have and the offshore wind farms. Basically, if they are not saying that we have given this much to whom, it doesn't make any sense. You know, like this is a policy gap. So the whole theme of this thing is to find what are being declared by them and how it can be, like how we can be in a better position as a mediator to mediate the two sectors, for example, fisheries and wind farms, because they have conflicts of the space.
No, just a couple of clarifications. When you talk about wind farms, we are talking here about floating wind farms or
No. It's the farms specifically where I work are not floating. They are not floating.
and about fishery. When you talk about the category of fishermen that can be affected by this kind of activity, and that in case of effect, this can be positive or negative, depending.
The small scale fishermen which is having boat less than 12 meters, they are most in number, so they are the first person to get affected by any sort of. Also, in public participation, that's the thing. As I said that in one of the wind farms which was out of my study, they shifted the area from 12 nautical miles to a bit further. Like they set up it bit further just because of the fishermen who were saying that we. So sometimes public participation
Can adapt.
yeah.
But in case of fishermen and so artisanal fishermen ask not to move a little bit offshore the structure, but for the fishermen that fish already offshore, for example, this can have an impact. This can be considered a sort of aquaculture, opportunity that are developed where fishermen can improve, or these are typical important restrictions for them.
Yeah. So I mean there are some wind farms where they have planned to build aquaculture facilities within that thing, and those fishermen do, like the document says that those fishermen do have priority in like doing those activities there, and government is gonna provide some financial support and subsidies to those farmers who are being affected the most. And like for example, those fishermen who are registered in those clusters, in that, for example, in Brittany, in Normandy, fishermen cooperatives do have clusters in every region. Even based on the 34 auction centers, they are registered at least everywhere. So they will be having priority in the things which you said, for example, developing.
And in general, this company develops a mitigation measure in terms of impact they will have on the sector. There are several projects that are designing structures that can develop some also other kind of services, not only the production of
As you can see, this is local project developers. Okay, this is area of Mediterranean Sea. Here, French government is prioritizing floating wind farms. So instead of having all the headquarters, like all the big wind farms do have headquarters in Paris, simple as that. But you can see from the map there are 7 small the project developers involved in developing those technologies. So French government is prioritizing that as well. I mean, so this is also interesting to see that, at least it is having an, and the thing which you specifically asked, that what are the mitigation measures? Yeah, I mean when they drill, they use like bubble wrapping around the drilling machine to mitigate the sound.
Okay. I was interested in mitigation after the installation of the structure, because it's something that we need to involve more categories of stakeholders, present in the area, but it's something that probably will be developed during the project.
I mean, most of the wind farms do sponsor studies to show the positive reef effect and stuff like that. And like if you see the funding on those studies, you get clear idea that these people are, I mean, trying to promote that thing that it is best, but of course, every stakeholder do have different interests.
You have a question from the audience?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, you talked a bit at the end about how equitable systems are really important. And in this context with offshore wind industry and fisheries, do you think that approaching it from more of a policy standpoint and regulatory or economic, through economic incentives or taxes, it would be more effective?
Okay, so I mean, okay, so see, the thing is, every stakeholder do have different social, economical, and environmental interest. Okay? We, as a, for example, if I am a policymaker, as a politician, I will be having different. I would promote. I would say people to have, you know. I will assure the people in the area that, oh, I will give you fishing quotas and I will not let this project come. But on the other side, offshore wind farm stakeholders have different interests. So it's difficult to say, but most of the time, economy is winning. I mean, what I observe is, like, I mean, whatever we say, I mean, of course, for example, if the wind farm we are drilling like the seabed, right? So it's not good for the environment, but it is happening. So I would say economy do win most of the time. As a researcher, it's hard to say, but.
So with this conclusion that economy is important, maybe blue economy is important too. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you all. About
Next session is online. I will be your host. No, it's Teams. The presenter is online.
All right. Can you all hear me? Okay. Hi. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon for you. No, I did not know if you wanted me to do that yet. I'll just share it. And maybe I can get that done. Okay. Trying to get a full screen. Well, if we start from the last slide, yeah, but I just realized it was the last slide, and that kind of cuts the whole process. Before I start, I just wanted to say I have someone connected on the YouTube that tells me they didn't have sound during Leah's presentation, and apparently there is a line on the board they see that says to reactivate sound, and that is disconnected, and it should be turned on. Okay, no problem. Just to inform you of it. And all right. Okay, that's perfect. I'll put a timer as well on my side. If it's okay with you, I'll start. All right. All right. Thank you. Okay. So my name is Romane Bertin, and today I want to present to you my work for my thesis, which is managing the social ecosystem by including indigenous knowledge using the case of the Grand Barachois in Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon. And I'm doing that work under the supervision of Fabrice Tellecha from the Lorraine University and Camille Mazet from Sciences Po, so both based in France. So first off, as an introduction, let's talk about the social ecosystem, because it's not something that we commonly see in our field of work. So a social ecosystem is actually a framework that describes the interactions and the interdependencies between human societies and the natural environment. If you look on the right side of the slide, you'll see a graph by Ostrom made in 2009 representing a social ecosystem. And as you can see, it combines in green boxes the biological variables and in blue the social variables, the social aspect. And all of them, they interact, they evolve together, and they have consequences on each other. The problem is we often lack the consideration of the social aspect of the social ecosystem. But because their resiliences are ultimately linked, we need to have an idea of what is going on in the human aspect of the social ecosystem. And that's why we need the stakeholders' perception. That's why we need indigenous knowledge of the people that know the environment. And okay, changing slide is not, sorry. The social ecosystem I want to tell you about, it's called the Grand Barachois. So I'm currently situated in Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon. It's a French archipelagos. It's south of Newfoundland, so east part of Canada. And the lagoon of the Grand Barachois, it's that triangular shape that you see in the island of Miquelon. It's quite wide, it's 200 hectares, and it's surrounded on the east and west border by sand dunes called the Buttereau. It has an opening to the sea on the east part, and you also have rivers coming from the north. What I want to say about that is that it's a quite dynamic environment, but it's also a very beautiful environment, and it's referred to as the jewel of the archipelagos by the locals here. And it's home to a population of seals and to marine birds as well that come here resting and reproducing. You also have a large Zoostera colony in the, I can't find the word, sorry, in the lagoon as well. So you have all of this, but you also have human activities. Here you can see kayaking, but you have traditional activities as well, such as hunting and fishing that have been happening for decades. But the problem is, recently, whenever we mention the Grand Barachois, that's not what we talk about. What we talk about is the eutrophication, and we talk about that chaetomorpha algae proliferation in the lagoon. It's been mentioned by locals for the last 20-25 years, but only referred to in the media for the last 10 years. The problem with it is that it's an annoyance for the people because of the smell, because of the possible toxicity. It's also a problem for the biodiversity, among other things, the zoostera being threatened by it. And it's only very recently that we've been tackling this pollution, this eutrophication, through a scientific project that was launched last year called the Barachois SPM project. As you see here, it's made of 6 activities. I am on that second one, defining the social ecosystem, but the project is much wider, also with field work for natural sciences and characterizing the ecosystem, implementing a marine educative area, and of course, important action for the restoration and management of the lagoon. Within my master thesis, my main objectives in representing the social ecosystem is to gather information about the lagoon, as to understand how it evolved to become what it is today. So those are biological information, but also human information, activities. It's also to understand the reasons for the lack of management for the last 25 years where the eutrophication happened and nothing was made to handle that. And finally, to identify stakeholders that should be included later on in a management committee. Talking about how that was made, well, there is a big part of data collection, because the point being to understand the evolution, we need to go back through the archives. We went through Facebook pages, private sources, and we tried and find anything that was related to the history of the lagoon, to its activities, to how it changed throughout the decades. And on the other hand, the data collection came through semi-structured interviews. So we had a set list of people we wanted to interview because of their function, because their wide knowledge of the lagoon. And we anonymized all of the interviews, of course, and they were recorded when authorized, which was in every but one case. The analysis of the interviews were made firstly through NUTA to get a transcription of it that we had to revise, and then through NVivo. I can get into the details of it afterwards, absolutely. But for now, I will just tell you that NVivo is a software that helps you go from qualitative data into quantitative in order to do statistical analysis as well. And Canva, I'm sure you're familiar with it, which is a graphic tool online that I used for representation. Now let's dive into results. We have 3 main categories of results. The first one was the collection of local press newspaper. We found 12 newspaper articles between 1985 and 2001 that were focused on the lagoon. And the ones that you have here, which are in French, sorry, but they all focus on that huge debate that happened in the 80s about how to protect the lagoon and should we create a protected area, and that really divided the population. Those articles, they help us go back in time and understand the mentalities 40 years ago. But thanks to the pictures, we can actually go even further back, and we go 70 years ago, even a little bit more sometimes, because we found pictures. One was actually from 1945, the others are from the 50s, the 60s, and we found almost 300 pictures from personal collection and Facebook. Here you see human activities of fishing and hunting in the lagoon, but we'll get back to it later. And finally, our third type of data was the interviews we did. And we managed to get 21 interviews, which for such a small community where everyone knows each other, we were really happy with, for a total of 13 hours of interview. And we managed to get people from different functions as to understand every point of view when it comes to the lagoon. We found that we interviewed mostly men, most of them working, but we also had some retired people, 85, 90 years old, that had a very good understanding of how the lagoon changed throughout the years. And mostly men, which is not surprising because the activities related to the lagoon are traditionally made by men. And what it gives us is a lot of perception by the local population. I won't have time to get into all of it, but I'll just talk about the perceived causes for eutrophication, and we can discuss the rest later. There are several causes that were perceived, but the interesting thing is that they're all interdependent, and we can link all of them. So here what you see is the main part people attribute to the eutrophication is the covering of the lagoon by sand, coming with very strong western winds. If you see my, yeah, here, strong western winds that are going to attack the sand dunes, which is this thin line that you have on the picture. And here you can see a comparison between black and white, the 1960s, and in color 2025, and you see how that very thin sand dune has thinnered throughout the years, and how we lost some sand here. So the explanation would be that because of the wind, it goes within the lagoon. But there is also the fact that because of global warming, we have less ice protection. And if you read what that person said, they say there's less ice than there was before. And it protected the sand. And the sand now blows away and it ends up in the Barachois. Because before, you see those ice cliffs, they were on the ocean side and they protected the dunes from waves and from waves overall. So we have that erosion as well because of the lack of protection. And all of this leads to a lessened water circulation. If you look on the right, you see how we have more and more sand and less of an opening into the ocean on the east part of the Barachois. But the causes are also human related. They're not all natural. One of the reasons if we have erosion is because we don't have that buttero, so the dunes engineering anymore. That person here told us that they used to cause the buttero to collapse so that they would recreate a slope with less wind hitting it and less sand would be blown away into the Barachois. Today, no one knows how to do that. We lost some very interesting indigenous knowledge, and so we lose that ability to protect our lagoon. Another problem that people have perceived is the fact that we stopped hunting seals, which is now completely illegal. But you see on the pictures, people have at least 20 dead seals when they go to the Barachois. And the perception is that because we don't kill them anymore, there are more of them. More of them means more excrement, and more excrement with less water circulation means it stays within the Barachois, adding nutrients and causing the eutrophication. Those are the perceived causes for the eutrophication. I only detailed that one because of a lack of time, of course, but there are plenty others. That slide here is to tell you that the in vivo analysis that we did allowed us to detail every one of our interviews according to the topics that were mentioned. And on the column on the left, you see the amount of time one respondent gave to every little category. So you see that that person talked about management quite a lot. And to that, we could add the perception, whether it is positive or negative, of the environmental issue. And so that would give us a very strong idea of who thinks what, and we could make clusters of people thinking the same thing. We could understand what the needs are for the population, the concerns, the expectations for solutions in the future, etc. That's what was expected with the in vivo analysis. And for the discussion, I once again want to emphasize on one specific thing, even though the amount of things we could say is really, really vast. But I want to talk about that shifting baseline syndrome, which was introduced by Daniel Pauly in '95. If we read that extract of the interview, someone talking about young people say that they don't have they don't have an adequate perspective when it comes to ecological timescales. He says that they're prisoners of what they've experienced and they use a degraded state as a baseline. And that's something that a lot of people have told us, especially older people have told us. We don't have a baseline here at Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon because we don't have they're older sciences. We don't have a lot of studies. So what we're aiming for here as well is to archive some work on the Barachois, and it's to get a memory work going, to get back traditional indigenous knowledge, to get historical references. We want to go back in time in order to get, I'm losing the thing here, in order to get historical references. What we have today is merely the job of naturalists during the 90s and beginning of the 2000s. And you see here counting of changes in bird population was mostly what was made because that was their interest. So the historical reference is only 25 years old. I'll conclude my presentation by saying what I think brings studying the social ecosystem when talking about a natural sciences study and project. The thing is that we've been able to use the social ecosystem framework at every step because we now have better ideas of the concerns of people, what we should focus on, the science knowledge gap that there is on the archipelagos. So we know where to focus when we will do field work for that project. It also helps us for that sixth activity, actions for ecological restoration, because we understand what people actually want in their islands and what kind of management they're hoping for, what were the blockage points until now. So we really tried and used that framework throughout the study. And finally, I first showed you that graph, which is a theoretical graph of what a social ecosystem is. Well, this is what we've tried to achieve by creating the representation of the socio-ecosystem of the Grand Barachois. You see the complexity of the various actors, and in blue you also see the ecological variables, and you see that you have interactions between some of them. You have tensions, you have alliances, and you see how people actually interact with each other and with the environment today in Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. I will stop here. Thank you very much. I actually spoke very fast. I'm very sorry. Here are my references, and thank you for listening. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. So we have around 6,000 people on the archipelagos, which is divided between those two islands that I was showing you. The main part of the population is in Saint-Pierre, and in Miquelon there is only 600, more or less, people. So the island in which there is the lagoon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can show you this. You have on the right side the function. I actually, and now realize I should have put it in my presentation, but I actually also did a Van Veen diagram to divide in between different functions. So people representing institution, people representing just users of the lagoon, politics as well. And so we can see the background of the people. But here you see we have people that are just, in quotes, fishermen, they're users, and we have people that come from institutions as well. The challenge was that most of the people have different how to say that, activities. So you will have a representative of the parliament, for example, that has been using the Barachois for his entire life. So they have both of those views, and you have to understand if they talk as a user, a former hunter, or as a representative of the territory. Well, yeah, it used to be. Now it's much more classic, I would say. But Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, being so far away, was always French, but for a long time was really related to fishing, and it was very an international hub for fishing. But since Canada has stopped fishing, I don't know what morue is in English, I'm sorry, but a species of fish that we had here, it really changed the activity of the people here, and it became much more like a normal town with various jobs. But 30 years ago, it used to be only in one sector of activity, that's sure. So we have actually started this week some fieldwork with people coming from mainland France to study. Well, one of the things that we've noticed is that people have no data about the actual sand covering of the lagoon. It's all about perception, all about what their parents thought was true and what they think is true now. So we have people coming from for the geomorphological aspect of the lagoon, and that's we're gonna try and give results, and we're gonna like do a conference or something to present it to the population and give back a study that gives actual scientific results. That's like one example of it, yeah. Yeah, thank you. We did contact a few more. In total, it was 26. Some did not want to talk because there is frustration of scientific, or at least people coming from outside the island to study, and so some refused. And we have two that we did not manage to get yet, but we're hoping to interview a bit later on. But no, we didn't contact a large panel because it was very specific to the function. It wasn't having as much people as possible, but more like the quality of the information we would get. Yeah, I think that's definitely a limitation. Also because, for example, for the users, it also worked with that person knows that person, and that's how we got the contact. So we have this bias of people knowing each other. To counter this, there should be, beginning of next year, a questionnaire that would be handed to the population in its entirety, and people can answer to that. And thanks to this first work that kind of allowed us to get specific, we can ask more precise question to the rest of the population that is less concerned, or at least less connected to it directly. Yeah. I'm glad you're asking. The thing with that lagoon is that the first people that have tried is the Hunting Federation, which we would not expect. And I want to talk about it in the discussion when I will hand in my report, is that it's just the local population of the hunters that decided to do something, and they tried removing the algae through nets and through trucks, and trying to do something and to remove it. They used boats and trucks. They actually broke a boat motor with it because it's such a large amount, and then the thing gets stuck in it. So they tried 2 times, and because they didn't have any support from the local authorities, they stopped, and they changed their way of action, and they just wrote letters to the authorities saying, well, we've done what we could. Now we need larger budget, we need more people, we need something concrete happening. Yeah, of course, my pleasure. Yeah. I'm so sure. Can I interrupt you? I guess there is a mic in the middle. Is it possible to? Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, much better. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Should we look for something else too? Yeah. As in, can we go back to the first, or like to a baseline of before? Okay. In that situation, I think that we can't go back to it, but we can definitely make some progress in understanding what the baseline used to be. But going back to it would be very difficult. You mentioned global warming and those strong winds that are getting stronger. There's also the fact that the dunes are degrading so much that the road that is on it is degrading as well. There is a possible breach of the lagoon. So I don't think we can ever go back to it. But I think the major issue now is that no one really knows what it was. So we're trying at our best to at least know where we came from to understand where we are now. But for sure, there is this kind of fatalism, if you can say that in English, fatalism of a state, a pristine state that we've lost and won't get back. Yeah. I hope I am. Yeah, sorry, the mic thing is. Thanks. Thanks so much. I think the sound was cut off. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess one usual driver that you get from eutrophication is the human activities on land and how it can get into the water throughout the rivers. I mentioned the rivers. Here, Miquelon is really unpopulated, and the village is up in the north. I can show you the map again. I don't know if that's what you were waiting for me to say. So if you want to focus on something else, tell me. But so if you see, yeah. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, we've actually discussed this. Can you see my souris, my mouth? on the, I don't know, but right above the lagoon, right here on the northwest of it, there are a few sorry, agricultural lands, my bad. And we've actually discussed it, and we managed to find the person that was in charge of it before and is in charge of it now, to understand if it had changed. And they assured us that they don't put any pollutant, and they try to be as environmental friendly in the things that they use as possible. And they don't recall any changes in the products they've used in the last 40 years. But that was one big lead that we have is, oh, if they change this, it's so close to the lagoon that it might have an impact. And for the rest, the village of Miquelon, I'm trying to find the thing again. Okay, the village of Miquelon is here, so on the very top of the island. And everything else is just forests, except for that agricultural part. So that would be the input. During the fieldwork that is going to happen this week and the next week, some people are actually going to go and study the soil quality there to give us an answer, a definitive answer. The person we talked to was not the farmer directly, but well, yeah, no, he is the farmer. He works for the local authorities here, but he is the farmer of the land. He's been for the last 10 years. So yeah, sorry, I'm thinking out loud. Thanks. Yeah. That's the thing is well, there is the OFB here, which is the the Office for the Environment in France. And they've been doing countings of seals for the last 10 years. So it's very recent again, but they don't see any changes in the population. And from every data that we collected, except for the perception of the inhabitants, the numbers should not have changed that much. At least there is not an exponential number of seals in the last 20 or 30 years. So we really have to navigate between perception and facts. And I think that's the most difficult thing here, is to understand what is created in a common idea and what is actually happening or has happened. Well, thanks to all of you. Thank you. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm trying to share this. Configure. Well, it should be okay. I think I need to leave the call 1 second, it says, to be able to share, like reboot the system. Oh my God, please. Can I do that 1 second or not? Yeah, I know. It's just I'm trying to share my screen, but it does. Okay. Maybe now. No, this is a whiteboard. No. Okay. Oh my God. Wait a second, please. Oh my God, it doesn't allow me to share my screen. I don't know why. Sorry, can I 1 second hang up and reboot the system? Reboot the, yeah? Yep. Okay, I'm sorry. 1 second, please. Okay. Hello again. Yes, I should be able to now share the screen. Can you see? It says that it's sharing. Can you see my screen? Yeah? Oh my God. Okay, I will. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending the talk. Today, I will be presenting my master thesis work, which focuses on the reproductive dynamics of the European anchovy, or Engralius encrasicolus, along the Catalan coast. I would like to begin this presentation by saying that, yes, it's a small species, yet it has a big role. This is because it's widely distributed around European lands. We can find it in the North Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, or the Black Sea. And it also constitutes a fundamental species, both ecologically and economically. Ecologically, because it's a key bioindicator for the assessment of the health of our oceans, and also it's a linkage species between the different trophic levels on the water column. And economically, well, it's a highly targeted species for the fisheries industry, more than anything in the Mediterranean basin. So knowing this, the end goal of our project, which is the reproductive assessment, what is it? Is to achieve a sustainable management of the fish stock, of the stock for these fish species. How are we going to do that? For that, we established a main aim for this study, which is to evaluate and assess the reproductive status of the European anchovy in the eastern Mediterranean coast of Spain. More specifically, what we wanted to do is to determine whether spatial differentiation existed in the reproductive status despite the relatively small geographical scale. We also wanted to assess the consistency and correspondence between macroscopic and microscopic or histological observation of the gonadal development stages. And we wanted to investigate whether potential disruptions could take place along this development. For that, we need to talk about the methodology, but before talking about it, I would like to remark that this project is larger than the time that I'm going to be on it. It's set to last at least 1 year, but for the time being, what concerns me, the sampling period for this study was taken from February to April in 2 differentiated locations along the Catalan coast. For that, we chose locations where the practice of fishing anchovy was already established. And we have Escala on the top north part of the Catalan coast, as you can see on the map, but also Tarragona, which is located more in the central south area of the Catalan coast. This sampling was conducted on board of commercial fishing vessels that had an agreement with ICATMAR, which is the organization that we partnered with for this study. And finally, we got our hands on 150 individuals, but it's important to remark that for the month of March, we did not get any fisheries catch for the site of Tarragona. Now, once we would get the fishing catch, we would bring it to the dissection lab at the ICM, and along with the team of ICATMAR, what we would do is that we would select 30 individuals for biological analysis. This biological analysis, of course, included the dissection of the fish and the preservation of the gonad. Also, we took digestive tracts from them, and we took some measurements with like the total length, the total weight, or the gonadal weight. We also did assess the sex determination throughout macroscopic examination. So we would classify the individuals either male, female, or indeterminate. Indeterminate was done in the cases. This happened mostly at the beginning of the project because the gonads were they were mostly mature, so it was really difficult to assess the sex at that moment. So we just lean on the microscopic examination, and we also assessed the fat states. How did we do this? Well, we opened the fish and we took a look to the digestive tract of the fish, and depending on how much quantity of fat was surrounding this area, we would assess a number for each stage. Once this was done, we took the gonads preserved in 70% ethanol to the histological lab, where they underwent a paraffin embedding protocol developed by Micoli. This protocol was perfect for us because he worked also on European anchovy, and this protocol was this protocol was done for gonads of less than 1 centimeter, for which our case fit perfectly. The result of this paraffin embedding protocol was the obtention of cubicles of paraffin, where the gonad was included in, which is the process of cutting it on the microtome machine. So for that reason, we got histological sections of each 100 microns intervals. This was to ensure the sampling of the different layers of the gonad. And we selected a section thickness of 5 microns. This was to ensure the correct display and visualization and focus under the microscope. And ultimately, we found ourselves with 2 replicates per individual, just in case something would go wrong during the staining protocol, for example, so we would have a backup. The staining protocol was hematoxylin eosin basic staining, but adapted for the gonads. The last step for this methodology was conducted on the imaging lab. So what we did is we brought the samples already stained to the imaging lab, where we would check them under a Zeiss axioscope microscope, which is the microscope that you can see on the image when the camera on top. And we analyze them throughout the software of Zeiss Zen, which is a widely known software for this kind of studies and taking pictures of histological cuts. For that, what we did is that we observed the female gonads under 10 times magnification, and the male gonads, because they had a reduced size and also they require more resolution, we observed them under 40 times magnification. Okay, so in order to quantify our results, we made use of several indicators, the first of which is the sexual maturation stage, that as you can see here, we have 6 different stages. All of these are addressed macroscopically, but on a first look to the plot, what we can observe is that Tarragona shows higher proportions of advanced maturation stages, more than anything in the month of April. But also, if we take a look to the month of February, we can see that they also show earlier stages than the individuals of La Scala. What that gives us a hint is that these individuals, for the same period of time, they underwent a bigger variation than the individuals of La Scala. Another really interesting index to look at is the fat index. So this is not really used, or I haven't seen it that much, but if you check both plots, Tarragona individuals show higher fat indices in the earlier months. This suggests that these individuals in Tarragona started to fed up before the individuals on La Scala, preparing themselves better for the breeding season, or even started the breeding season in an earlier time than the individuals of La Scala. So in order with that, we checked for the gonadal weight as well. And as you can see on the gonadal weight per location, we can see that there is a difference more than anything in La Scala. There's a significant difference, and this difference is even higher when we look at the gonadal weight per sex on the females. Also, in relation with that, the weight fluctuations, we check for the total weight. So here we can see that the weight doesn't change that much for any period of the sampling for the location of Scala, but yet again in Tarragona we can see that the total weight increases significantly for both sexes. And when we check the weight per sex, we can see that generally females are consistently heavier than the males. Now, looking at the reproductive indicators, we selected the GSI, or gonadosomatic index, and here we can see that for both locations, the gonadosomatic index starts to increase. Of course, Tarragona always a step more than the individuals of La Scala. And then we can see that the high differentiation for the month of April, indicating that either the spawning season has already started for some of them, or they are about to reach it. Now, taking a look to the histological analysis, I made 2 photo grids or photo panels where the ovarium developmental phases and subphases of the European anchovy can be seen. In this, for the females, we can see that for February we have immature individuals. For March, we have resting, and for April, we have already advanced maturity. On a first look to this panel, what we can observe is that there is indeed differentiation and variation along the period of the sampling, so temporal variation is present. But if we focus just on the month of April, we can see that amongst the different individuals of La Scala and Tarragona, in Tarragona, we can already see that there is a bigger amount of hydrated and mature oocytes and also vitellogenic stage 2 oocytes, in contrast to the individuals in April. This already aligns with the macroscopic findings that I already presented. And for the males, it's a similar situation. We can see here that there is a changing in the structure along the period of the sampling. So there is, again, temporal variation, and we focus ourselves on just the month of April. We will see there is a change on the maturation of the testes. So, for example, for the individuals in Tarragona, we can see that structures that are typical for mature testes, such as the spermatogenic tubule lumen, here it's already present, and you can already clearly see. Now, given the time was not enough for me, I just selected 3 females from each month and each location to plot this graph, which shows the percentage of different classes of oocytes for the European anchovy. Here, what we can observe is the same that we have already observed. We can focus, if you want, on just one site, which will be Tarragona. For the month of February and the month of April, we can see clearly how the previtellogenic oocytes get diminished by almost 50% for the month of April, which shows that already these gonads have been maturing over time. But if we also take a look to the month of April and we compare 2 sites, such as the Scala and Tarragona, we will see that, yes, both of them are already in advanced stages of maturity, but Tarragona still shows certain a bit more of advance in this stage due to the higher numbers and proportions of vitellogenic and mature oocytes, even atresia ones, which indicates that already has reached peak spawning. Something that we didn't expect to encounter, it was the intersex occurrence. So in this photo panel, what you can observe is the section of 3 different males that were collected in March in the location of La Scala. And you can clearly observe the presence of female oocytes, well, clearly mature within the tissue of the male gonad. This is clearly not a normal development for the male gonads. And even though these kind of events have been already presented in other studies, for this species of the European anchovy, I didn't find as many papers, but I did find one that it was also in the coast of Spain, in Cádiz, that described this same event. And well, it addressed it to pollutants and certain endocrine disruptors. And even though we don't really get conclusive results in this study, I thought it was important to pinpoint out the necessity or the need to constant monitor these species. So what are the key takeaways? We need to look back at the beginning of the presentation, where I said that we aimed to have a more sustainable management of the stock species. So to the question of, is there variations on the spatial areas? Yes, there is. We clearly see that Tarragona and Scala show differences both temporally and spatially. We also correlated the observation between macroscopic and histological analysis of the gonads. And another thing that we got on this study, it was the evidence of intersex condition that can really be important for the health indicators. All of these will help in a future to create a more sustainable fisheries practices. And now the future perspectives that we expect out of this project. Well, as I mentioned, this is a 1-year study period, and I believe that it's important that we try to expand the temporal coverage by sampling along a more elongated time. But also we need to integrate environmental drivers that may have an effect on the population dynamics, we need to incorporate fishery data that will, in the end, contribute to the stock assessment models that we want to create in order to raise awareness among the different stakeholders. And finally, I would like to acknowledge all the people that participated in this project. First of all, my supervisor, Isabel from the Instituto de Ciencias del Mar in Barcelona. Also, my main supervisor, Urtzi, in the University of the Basque Country, because without him, I wouldn't be able to do this. And also, of course, our partners at ICADMAR, which have allowed us to use their samples and their information and have been of great help during the sampling. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I will be ready to reply to any questions that you may have now. I don't know if you can see or... Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was really not that much information on the European anchovy in general. I saw different studies, but none of them really took a look to the dynamics, taking into account the fisheries. There's a lot of studies that explain and follow the dynamics of, for example, the sardine. But not so much that that study these species that study these species. So of course there is a lot of information on the fisheries, and there is a lot of information on, for example, spawning seasons and the methods of spawning of sardines and mackerel, for example, but not for the European anchovy. Yeah. Yeah, I did expect some difference between the gonadal weight per sex, because it's not when they destine all their energy to the development of the gonads, the females, the ovaries tend to be heavier than the males because of course they carry the eggs. The eggs then have to hydrate, and there is a significant difference between the testes, and the evolution of the testes is much more simple. It doesn't carry that much energy into it. In contrast, the females, they need to just the creation of the egg carries much more energy, and of course they have to carry all the proteins and all the vitellogenin. So I expected them to be more heavier, yes. Well, as I said, the FAT index, how we can interpret them is that the spawning strategy of the anchovy is really different to the one of the sardine, for example. The sardine will feed all the year long, and then they will spawn. They will carry all the time a significant amount of energy within themselves. But for the anchovy, what they do is that they feed up extremely much before the spawning season. So how this may help in terms of conservation or fisheries strategies? Well, Tarragona site demonstrated that the anchovies are already preparing for the spawning season before the ones of La Scala. So maybe what we can implant is fishing bans during this period of the time, because we need them to be ready for the spawning season in order to regrow the population. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, the gonads in the next one here with the 70% ethanol, you mean? No. They were on a Davidson mix. They were on a Davidson mix for 1 day, and then they would change. The medium was changed to 70% ethanol because sometimes we were not able to just process them on the immediate time. So we would, because the protocol of embedding is at least 8 hours. So we really needed to to have a full day just for the paraffin embedding protocol. So we would just get the gonads, extract them from the fish, put them in the Davidson mixture, and then 1 day after, 24 hours, we would change them to ethanol. Well, I really relied on the information that I had available because my supervisor worked already with this kind of fish and the gonads, so I just followed the instructions. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, well, this is a bit tricky because I had more than 1,000 images. So I did not analyze all of them because, as I said, the time was really tight, so I didn't really have the time to process all of the images. The idea was, yes, to analyze all of them so we would have a proper comparison about the macroscopic and the microscopic methodology. But no, I did not analyze all of them. I do have the pictures, but since the project is said to be at least 1 year, someone else will take on that, and the work is done, but I just didn't have the time to analyze all of them. Yes, it is. But again, I know it's a lot of work. The more, the sweeter, I suppose. But I relied on the instructions of my supervisor. Yes. An artifact? Yes. We thought that because I was honestly it was really difficult to manipulate these samples sometimes because they were really thin and really well, difficult to manage. But I did ask again to my supervisor because I was with the fear of, oh, maybe this is contamination, cross contamination with the male cats, because maybe the blade carried some eggs or something. But no, as you can see, for example, for the sample 6, we can see that the oocytes are really in the tissue. They are really included. So it would be, I did get some contamination, but normally those eggs were not within the tissue. They were normally outside the tissue because there's no way that they would get included so much. So this shows that clearly, yeah, it's within the tissue, so they pertain to this individual. Yeah. Well, for Scala, you mean? Sorry. Yes. This will continue. What I expect is that I mean, I'm a bit with blind's eye, but what I would expect is that the seasonality of the breeding season would enlarge for the individuals of Tarragona because the conditions are optimal for them since an earlier time. So probably the individuals of La Scala, since they have shown less variation over time, for them it's going to be not as easy to reach optimal condition for the spawning event. So they will they will be less efficient on the process. So maybe their spawning season will be reduced. That's what I expect. But again, it's never been done on these areas, so we don't really know what to expect. Also, while we were sampling, we encountered some problems because for the Tarragona side that we didn't get the fisheries catch in March, we were looking for the reasons because, for example, the Valencian community, which is really underneath Tarragona, they were getting anchovies. So we really couldn't guess what was the factor for that. So the environmental conditions and probably the fishing pressure will also take a part on this study. Yeah, thank you. It's okay. Yes. Yeah. What is, sorry, the last part I didn't quite understand. Well, the areas for the study were selected in accordance with ICANMAR. This is done because, well, this project was already kind of thought before I stepped in. So they wanted to sample two different locations with really that were enough separated between themselves. So north and the southern point possible. That's why Escala and Tarragona. But also they are not geographically the same. So Escala Harbor is located in a kind of a bay. So it's more of an enclosed area. In contrast, Tarragona, it's an open area. It's not the same geographical well, kind of terrain at all. Also, Tarragona, it's really close to the Delta River, so it's based on certain studies I've seen that this area tends to be a really nice breeding ground for this kind of fish, these kind of pelagic small fishes, because they acquire protection over a lot of predators, and of course the conditions for feeding themselves are optimal most of the time of the year. So I think those two were conditions or were factors that influenced on the selection of the sites. But yeah, ultimately the word was also given by ICANMAR, and I think they also took into account the availability of the vessels that they had to sample. So I think that was the real reason. Also, the differentiation between the different sites that I just said, it influenced, of course, but ultimately Kalmar had the last word. I'm sorry, it's just sometimes. Are you asking me if the results align with my thoughts on the site's characteristics? Yeah. Well, I expected Tarragona maybe to be more open to variations because of its geographical characteristics. I did not expect such a big difference between the ratio of growth of the gonad. That's for sure. But yeah, guess based on also other species that that I have taken a look at and comparisons between the sites and past fisheries, I did expect that the Tarragona individuals would get a higher level of maturation, or that they would be exposed to more factors. So either they would be positively influenced or negatively influenced. So more variation, definitely. Somewhat. Yeah, well, these yeah, there is a reason for that. In these plots, it's just basic counts. It's average, is percentages. On the contrast, these ones are really actually t-test that I performed. So they show the significant difference between the sites, or between between the sites. Sorry. They're what? What? T-test. Yeah, t-test. Yeah, between two groups. No. I just did because the samples. I mean, the information that I had, the data that I had, it was too simple. Yeah, I just had to compare two sites. So, okay, well, okay, but in our look, how we saw it, it was simple. So we just performing t-test. It was more than enough for our purpose. So that's why I didn't. I thought of it. I thought of doing an ANOVA analysis, but yeah, it was with this. We thought it was more than enough. Yes, I cannot listen really well. Ah, okay. Well, thank you. It was 17 minutes. Okay, I will stop here. Well, ciao. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Yeah, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much. Sorry. I got my supervisor on the phone at the same time. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Bye.